All right, so now we're going to start looking at blend shapes. And so blend shapes are a type of deformer that will allow you to create new shapes with geometry you already have. And then you can manipulate it with a slider so that you can transition from your base mesh or your original mesh to the target, which is the new mesh. So we're going to take a look at this, but before I do it on our character, we're going to look at it on a more basic geometry here. So let me go ahead and save my scene real quick, and then let's do a new scene. And let's bring in a sphere. And so this is going to be our final mesh. So anytime you set up your blend shapes, again, you want to make sure you're done modeling. And so in our case, we should theoretically, if we're scanning, we're already finished with our model. So let's go ahead and select our geometry, and let's go up here to Windows. Let's go to Animation Editors, and we're going to use this Shape Editor. And so in this box here, up at the top left-hand corner, you have a Create Blend Shape option. And then down below, it's going to show you all of the blend shapes currently in your scene. Now, currently, we haven't created a blend shape, so we're going to have to do that first. And what you'll want to do now is select the geometry that you want to create a blend shape on. So in this case, we're going to select the sphere. And then I'm going to come up here and hit a Create Blend Shape node. Now, this node is a overall influencer, and so what we need to do now is start establishing targets, and targets are going to be the different deformations that we want to blend to. So those are sort of like a sublayer or a subcategory to our overall blend node. So I'm going to select this blend node here, and then with my sphere still selected, I'm going to hit Add Target. Now you're going to notice a couple things here. So the blend shape or the blend node has a slider, and then the target also has a slider. And typically what you would want to do is you would want to double click here and name these as you go. But we're going to leave this at its default name. And if you look here to the right now, there's two columns. There's Edit and Key. So the Edit menu or the Edit button here lets you know that we are currently editing this particular target, and whatever we do to this geometry, it's going to store on this target layer. And if this is turned off, so if I simply click on that and turn it gray, we're now back to our original geometry. So whatever I do now is permanent to our geometry, and it will not be factored as part of this target. So when you are setting targets, you want to make absolutely certain that this is keyed on, because otherwise, again, we're changing the original mesh instead of the target mesh. All right, so I've got that turned on. We'll leave that on for now. There is another column here for key, so you can set keys to these, and if you do have a key on a particular blend node or a target, it'll check that little key bubble. But let's go ahead. We'll leave the target here for Sphere 2. So Sphere 2 target. We'll leave that on. We'll make sure the edit is highlighted, and then we'll start to change the topology here. So I'm going to go to vertex mode, and I'm going to start grabbing these vertices, and I'm going to move them and reshape our geometry. And all of the changes that I'm doing currently are being stored onto this target. And then if we were to come in and start playing with our slider, so with the target here and I guess the overall blend node there, a value of 1 is 100% influence, a value of 0 is going to be 0% influence. So if I were to take this slider now for the target, or that P-Sphere 2 target there, and left click and drag, you'll notice it starts to remove the influence from this particular target. If I take that back to 1, it will go back to the target shape. You can have multiple targets on the same geometry. So let me take this target and put it down to 0. I'm going to toggle off the edit, so we're no longer editing the target. And let me grab this geometry and this blend node here and hit Add Target to add another one. And so now you'll notice we have a P-Sphere 3 target, and to the right there, we still have this edit function where we can come in and start adjusting our new target. And so let's go ahead and change this now. So I'm going to right click and go to vertex mode. And now everything that I do is happening to the active target, which again is the second one that we just created. And let's yank this up like so. And if we wanted to test this out, I could now take that second target's weight or influence there, and we can scrub between its values. Now, you can run multiple targets at the same time. So you'll notice with the initial one that I set up, I eliminated its influence. If I were to come in now and slide this up, what it's going to do is it's going to average between the two. And so we can have both of these running at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and toggle edit off now for that second target. And so with the targets, you can control these individually. The blend node is a overall influencer. So if I were to, let's say, take the blend node and put its weight all the way down to 0, it will kill all of the influence to the sublayers or the targets beneath it. So just keep that in mind. All of this is based off of weights, so let's go ahead and add 100% influence back to this. If you right click on your geometry and go down to paint, now that we have a blend shape, you should have a blend shape option here under the paint. And in here you have base weights and paint target weights. And so if I were to click this base weight, we now get into painting weights. They look pretty similar to when we were painting our influences from our skin weights. But if we come in here now, again, a value of white is 100% influence. The brush works the same, so if I hold control and start painting out vertices to paint them black, what it's doing is it's eliminating the influence of this particular blend shape. And so now it's going to snap back to its original base form. Let's see, let's smooth that out. I'm going to hold shift and blend that back in. And then if we deselect that and play around with our blend nodes here, they will only be affected where we added the influence. Now that's kind of hideous. We probably would never do something like this, so I would most likely want to go back in and go back to the base weights and re-add that influence. So this is handy if we're setting up maybe corrective blend shapes and we only need it to affect one side of the geometry. We can have that blend shape, we can eliminate its influence from one side of the geometry, so it's only affecting the other. Alright, so those are blend shapes. Let's go ahead and look at this on our model now. So I'm going to reset my project. And let's open up our latest scene file, so this is version 20. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up a variety of facial expressions. So I want a couple expressions. So I want to do a smile, a frown. I want to be able to raise and lower my eyelids or eyebrows. And then I also want an eye blink. So we'll set those up. We'll also eventually start setting up a corrective blend shape so that, let's say, your foot or an arm or something like that bends to a certain degree. It will automate deformation so that the geometries, let's say your pant cuff, doesn't intersect or clip through your foot geometry. So let's start with the face first, though. So I'm going to grab my head here, and let's go up here to Windows, Animation Editors, and let's do the Shape Editor. Now, before I start adding blend shapes, there's one other thing I want to check here. Actually, let's create the blend shape node first, and then we'll correct this. So let me go ahead and just with this head selected, let me hit Create Blend Shape. Let me take this blend shape node, and we'll call this face underscore blend node. And so this is the overall blend node. Now we need to add a target. So I'm going to add a target here, and we'll call this, let's just do our expression. So let's call this smile. Let's add another one here. So I'm going to go back to the node, and we'll call this frown. Let's go back here. I'm going to select the node again, and we'll add another one. Let's call this brow ridge. And then I might want to be more specific here with my node. I'm going to actually call this kid face blend node. And then before I start adjusting or editing any of my targets, what I would like to do is change some of the ordering that happens underneath the hood of Maya here. So if I were to select my geometry here and right click, we want to go down to inputs here. Now your geometry has inputs and outputs running through it, and that's all the nodes currently connected to this particular geometry. So I do want to go into inputs and go down to all inputs. And it's going to open up a dialog box, and in here you're getting a list of all of the things running into this particular geometry right now. So if we look in this list, you have a delta mush, which is that corrective deformer that we applied. that was giving us a better definition right out of the gate. Below that, you have the skin cluster, which is the skinning that attached our geometry to the skin weights themselves. And then below that, you have the blend shape for the kid face blend node there. Now, this all operates on hierarchy, so anything that's at the top gets precedence over everything underneath. And I've noticed here lately that our blend shapes don't work as well when they're at the bottom of the hierarchy, and when we're trying to control our targets, the vertices will not move in an expected manner. So you might like try to pull the vertice to the right and it'll move left or up or down instead of the direction you're trying to go in. And that's because it's fighting over the influence that it's getting with these other inputs. So what I want to do is middle mouse click and drag on the attribute for the blend shape. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's drag it above our delta mush here. And sometimes it's stubborn and it won't let you move these. Let me try it again. And so I got it up here a little bit. Let's grab that delta mush and middle mouse click and drag it down. And so now we should have the blend shape at the top, the delta mush underneath, and then the skin, and then this tweak one node. And that should be it. So let's go ahead and hit close. And now let's start setting up our targets. And so I want to be very mindful over what currently has edit next to it, because that's going to be the target that we're creating. So let's start here at the top and work our way down. And we're going to start here with the smile. So I'm going to go ahead and hit edit. And then we need to get our character now that we're editing this particular target. Let's start making our character smile. And so I'm going to right click and go to vertex mode. And I might even do this in smooth preview. So I'm going to hit 3 on my keyboard. I'm going to grab that corner of the mouth. And then I want to do this symmetrically, so let's go into the tool settings and let's turn symmetry on in Object X. And then let's turn on soft select. So I just tap the B key on my keyboard. And then you'll want to play around with your settings here. So I'm going to hold B and middle mouse click and drag out to increase or decrease the influence of this brush. And then I'm going to pull this up and we're going to start making a smile. Now I might even rotate this a little bit, so I'm going to rotate it down and in a little bit there. And it's making this kind of weird corner in the mouth. I'm going to undo this. Let's Control Z back to our default. And I'm just going to play with my radius a little more here if it's not doing what I want. I think that's better. All right, and that looks good. We can test this out now. So if I go to the blend shape for the smile and play with its influence, I should go from our default mesh to our smile here. And then so that's our smile all taken care of. Let's take the target here for smile and put it down to 0 so it has no influence. Let's go to our frown now and let's turn edit on there. Just make sure it turned the edit off of the smile target, and now we're going to do the frown target. And it's going to be pretty similar. Let's just grab our geometry here, go to vertex. Let's grab the corner of the mouth. So I'm just grabbing one of the vertices there. Let's increase our fall off radius there. And then we're going to push this down. And I'm just looking at the shape it's making with the mouth. I might increase this a little more here on the radius. Maybe not that much. So don't be afraid to undo and reset the pose. All right, let's take a look there. So I'm going to deselect it, and then let's play with the slider here. I'm going to push that pose a little bit. There's not a tremendous difference here. So I'm going to set that target back to 100% influence and still make sure that it's selected. I'm going to bring up my soft select. And let's really bring this down and rotate it. Let's try that. There we go. And do keep in mind you can blend between all of these. So, you know, if I were to take that frown up and then take the smile up, it kind of looks like he's in his default pose, but what it's doing is it's blending between the two targets that I've already set up. But let's go ahead and kill those. So let's take those down to 0. Let's turn off edit. And let's move to our next target, which is our brow ridge. Now this one's a little more complicated just because of the way my character was modeled. This really depends on how you approached your character's eyebrows. So my character's eyebrows are separate geometries. They're separate from the rest of the face. And so I'm actually going to have to set up 2 separate blend nodes and then 2 targets for so I can get the eyebrows to follow the brow ridge. And so we're going to just focus on the brow ridge for now. We're going to ignore the fact that our eyebrows don't follow. But if you did either model your eyebrows as part of your geometry, or if you're going to include it as a texture, you wouldn't necessarily have to set it up the way I do. You could probably just do the brow ridge and be done with it. But let's go ahead and start setting this up. Now, these eyebrows are going to be in the way, so I'm going to select them and do a Control H. So Control H to hide them. I'm going to grab my geometry and right click and go to vertex mode, and then let's make sure we're actually editing the target. So here for brow ridge, I'm going to hit edit. We'll make this active, and then let's come in and start selecting geometry here around the eyebrow ridge. That fall off is probably a little too high. I really don't want this to lift my eyelid up off of my eyeball, so let's undo that. Let's hit B. And let's do that. That looks better. And we do want natural arcs happening in our geometry here. So I'm going to yank this up a little bit, but I might come in here now and grab just these 3 and pull them down just to get a nicer transition right around in there. That's pretty simple. Let's turn on our wireframe just so we can see this. And then I'm going to play around with my slider. So now we can do this. And now I need to do the same thing with my eyebrows, the actual eyebrow geometry. So let me take this brow ridge. I'm actually going to leave its target at 100% influence, but I'm going to toggle the off or the edit button to toggle that off so I can no longer adjust this. Let's go back into the outliner and find our eyebrows. So here and here, I'll control select both of those and press Shift H to unhide them. And then it really depends on how you want to set this up. Now, if you wanted to like do, let's say, raise one eyebrow at a time, it'd be a little bit more of a complex setup. I'm not going to do that though with this particular rig. I don't really necessarily need that amount of control over each eye. So what I might do instead is, if I want these to both be symmetrical when I am adjusting them on their target, what I would like to do is combine them as a single geometry, just so I can adjust them symmetrically at the same time. So let's shift select both eyebrows. Let's go up here to the modeling menu and go mesh combine. And again, anytime you do a combine, we'll want to delete it, because when you combine, it creates these empty group nodes here that we don't want. So with this geometry still selected, let's go up to edit. And then you want to be very, very careful if you do this. So if we do a delete all by type, it's going to delete all the history, including your skin weights and everything we've done to your rig, and it's going to break your rig. So don't do this. Do by type, and it will only delete the history on whatever you have selected. So let's go here, by type, history. You'll notice those nodes disappeared in the outliner. And then let's name this geometry. So it should be here at the bottom because it's a new geometry. Let's delete out that 1 here for poly. And then we only have one eyebrow geometry now, so I don't need to distinguish left or right. So let's delete that out and just call it kid brow poly. And then, let's see. I'm going to check its channel box here just to see if it is frozen, and it is. If it's not, you would want to go to modify and freeze its transformations. And then before I apply the blend shape to this, I'm going to go ahead and just parent it to the head. So let's grab eyebrow geometry. I'm going to shift select head joint 2 here, and let's hit P to parent. And then once I parented that, it added value to that because it's coming from the joint. Let's go ahead and freeze that again. So let's go to modify and freeze the transforms on those eyebrows one more time. And then we should be set to go to add a new blend shape. So we're going to do a whole new node for these eyebrows. We're not going to include them in the facial shapes here. So let's go ahead and select the brow geometry. Let's go to create blend shape, and let's call this kid brows blend node. And while they're still selected, we might as well just add a target to this. and we'll call it Browse Raise. I want to make sure that Browse Raise is in edit mode, and it currently is, so that's good. Let's go ahead and start adjusting this now. So I'm going to grab my eyebrow. I'm going to go to vertex mode. I'm going to grab some of these vertices here in the center. Let's make sure X-ray or Object X is turned on. Now the Object X isn't working, so let's switch this to World X instead. There we go. Now it's working, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to match this to my brow ridge. So if my brow ridge is currently down, I do want to take that brow ridge target and put it all the way up, and then let's start matching our eyebrows to that. So I'm going to pull these up. Let's grab the corners here and do the same thing. And again, just kind of looking at the overall arc there to make sure we get some kind of appealing arc. And that really should be it for the eyebrows themselves. We can test this out again just by playing with the target. And so now, they'll go from default to raised. Now these aren't working in tandem yet, but they will when we start setting up the controller. I'm going to go ahead and turn edit off so I know I'm no longer editing that. Let's turn symmetry off for now. And let's see, what else do we want to do here? Let's do our eye blinks. Now before I do the eye blinks, I want to kill all of the influences coming from my targets and my blend node. So I'm just going to take all of these sliders and let's set them all to 0. So I had a weird glitch in the previous class where these were on, and what it did is it applied this to my new target, which I don't want. So we're going to turn all those off. Let's just err on the safe side and save our scene. And now we're going to set up eye blinks. Now I'm going to do the eye blinks a little differently than we've been working. So this is a newer way, probably the past few versions of Maya. They changed the way we do our blend shapes. And so before we used to do it on 2 geometries. What you would do is you would have your original mesh or your base mesh. You would duplicate it, and that duplicate would then be your target. And what you would do is you would have 2 geometries, and you would modify the duplicate geometry, and whatever modifications you did, it would apply to the base or the original mesh. We're essentially doing the same thing under the hood with the way we're working now, but we do it all on the same geometry. We just create these target nodes, and we can use this edit menu to modify it all seemingly on the same geometry. We're going to do this the legacy way for the eye blinks though. So what I'm going to do is I am going to duplicate my head, and we're going to create a blend shape by using that new target or the duplicate mesh. So let's start there. I'm going to start by grabbing the head geometry, and then do keep in mind, it's going to be different depending on how you modeled your character. So if your character is all one piece, you're going to be duplicating the entire body. That's perfectly fine, but with my head, it's separate. So I'm going to grab the head, and I'm going to do a Control-D to duplicate it. Now you'll notice here in the outliner, and I would be very careful about this because we don't want to accidentally modify the original mesh. So down here at the bottom of the outliner, we have the new face mesh. So it's that kid face poly 1. Let's go ahead and just make absolutely sure the duplicate is selected. Let's go over here into the channel box and take a look. So anytime you skin a geometry, its translations or transforms automatically get locked because of that skinning. So you'll notice even with my duplicate here, the translate X, Y's, Z's, rotates, and so forth, they're all locked out with this little gray box. So what I'll do here is left click on Translate X and drag all the way down to Scale Z. With all those attributes selected, let's right click and let's go down to Unlock. Selected. And now I should be able to take this head and yank it over here in X, like so. And so now I've got my duplicate head here and my original head still attached to my body. Now, before I do anything else with this, I do want to delete its history, so I'm going to select this and go up to Edit, Delete by Type, History. Now, you do not want to, and actually let's be on the safe side. Let's go back there. Let's go to Edit, Delete by Type. I'm going to tear out this box, and let's just go down the list here real quick. And again, it's by type. Don't do all by type because it'll delete your scanning on your original rig. One thing we do not want to do to this, we do not want to freeze its transforms. If I freeze the transforms and set up the blend shape, what's going to happen is when I blend between the influences, the original head's going to rip off of the rig, and it's going to try to assume the position of the duplicate geometry. So do not want to freeze its transforms. All right, so now that we have that all set up, what we'll do here is we'll select the target or the duplicate mesh first, and then I will shift select the base mesh or the original mesh last. So let's go ahead and shift select both of these. And then here in the shape editor, let's hit create blend shape. And so we're going to have a third blend node for just our head. Now I'm going to test this out real quick just to make sure this worked, because I had problems with this in the previous class. When you do this, your target will be at 0% influence. So let's yank that up and see. Okay, so it's working. Cool. So let's undo that. Let's come in here and start naming everything. So this is going to be the word shape, and we'll call this blend node. We'll call this kid eyes blend node. And then our target here, this is going to be our blink. So let's call it eye blink. And then one other thing we'll need to do, so if you recall before when we looked at the inputs for our blend shapes versus the skin weights and that delta mush that we ran, we're going to have to go back and now reorganize this because we added a new blend shape. So I'm going to grab my head here. I'm going to right click and let's go down to inputs. Let's go down to all inputs, and you'll notice here that new blend node I created, that blend shape eyes, is at the bottom. So let's take this and middle mouse click and drag this above that delta mush, if it will let me, like so. And again, I just need to make sure it's at the top. Again, I've noticed if I don't do this, I get weird deformations and the vertices don't really match with what I'm trying to do. So we'll go ahead and with that set up, let's hit close. And now let's start setting up our eye blink. So I do want to make sure my eye blink target is set to 100 or 1, so that when I start adjusting this, I can actually preview it. And then the reason why I like to work like this is it's going to give me the ability to, it makes selecting vertices a little easier in some cases. And we can also work in a split panel view so that I can have two cameras going, one looking at the original face and one looking at the target. So let's go ahead and do a split panel view. On the left-hand side, we will do the regular perspective camera, and let's just zoom in here on the original base mesh face. On the right-hand side, let's go to Panels, Perspective, and let's throw in a new camera, and let's focus on the target head. And so now we can start setting up this eye blink. And what I'm going to do is start selecting the vertices here around the upper eyelid, because when we do a blink, most of that movement, or the majority of the movement, is going to come from the upper eyelid, not the lower. So let's go ahead and let's go to vertex mode. I'm going to start selecting vertices here, and now we need to go in and just turn on symmetry. So we're going to do Object X, and that looks like that's good. Let's go ahead and collapse this to maximize our screen real estate, and let's start selecting these verts. Now I'm still in soft select, so I'm going to tap B to get rid of that, and I'm going to start clicking on these vertices here around our eyelid ridge, and I want to get that one right there on the inside too. If you notice your camera's rate of movement is a little quick, if you hit F to reframe, your camera should move a little more friendly. And then again, I'm going to get it mostly to the corner there. I'm going to leave the corner alone, and then I'm going to hold shift. I'm going to grab this one more set of vertices here right above the eyebrow or the eyelid ridge. And then there's a couple things we're going to want to do with our rotation tool. So we're going to rotate these down to conform over the shape of our eyeball geometry. To do this, it would be ideal if our pivot point was happening from the center of the eyeball, because we want to rotate out in sort of a circular fashion so that, again, it conforms to the eyeball geometry. So we're going to have to move our pivot point. So let's go over here, and I'm going to bring up my rotation tool. Let's just double click on that. I'm going to hit E on my keyboard to bring up the rotation tool. And then in here, there's this option called Pin Component Pivot. Now what this does is it will memorize your pivot point wherever it's at. So normally by default, when you make new selections, it will update your pivot point based on your new selection. But if I turn this on and then select something else, well, it was supposed to memorize it. Well, that might be a problem. Let me try that again. Let's move the pivot first, and then we'll try it. We'll keep our fingers crossed. All right, so I'm going to move this pivot. So I'm going to tap the D key, and so I'm not holding the D key. I just tapped it once, and we're going to realign this pivot point. Now I'm going to do this from the side view. So let's go to the right view here. Let's turn on X-ray mode. And I'm going to try to align this to be center to the eyeball itself. So right around in there, should be close to the center of my eyeball. Now let's do Pin Component Pivot. I'm going to tap the D key again to go back to my regular rotation tool. Now I keep using the hotbox. You can also use the panel up here to go back to your camera. So let's go to Panels, Perspective 1. And then I'm going to hit B on my keyboard to bring up Soft Select because we do want it to grab a little bit of the surrounding area. And then one other thing we'll want to do with the Soft Select is control the geometry that it's grabbing. So over here, back into our tool settings, let's open up the Soft Selection. And by default, this is set to volume. And this is going to grab these vertices, and it's going to theoretically grab some of these vertices here on the lower eyelid. Just because they're near and within the fall off radius. Now if you switch this from volume to surface, it's only going to look at the surrounding surface or the selected objects here, and because these are separate surfaces, it's going to, unless my fall off is really huge, it's only going to affect the upper eyelid and it's going to ignore this lower eyelid. So I would recommend just switching this to surface so it's a little easier to work with. And then let's I'm going to take the soft select down a little bit. So again, to adjust your soft select, you hold the B key, so it's B like Bravo, middle mouse click and drag. And something like that should be good. And what we're looking for here is sort of a straight line going across with our eyelid. And as I do this, I'm always looking at the left-hand side just to see how it's conforming to the eyeball geometry itself. And then while I'm doing this, I'm going to do it in low res here. So I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard to go to the low res preview mode here on the right. I'm going to keep it in the smooth preview there on the left. And so let's go ahead and start rotating this down in X. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking at the corners of the eyes. So I'm kind of ignoring the rest of the eyelid shape here for now. I'm just looking at these corners for when they're aligned to the actual corner of the eyeball. And once I get it into a spot that I want, I will stop rotating and I'm going to hold Control and I'm going to marquee drag over these vertices to deselect them. And there my pivot point stayed. So let's keep going here. So once we deselect those, let's start rotating down. And now that next set is in line on both sides. Let's deselect those because I don't want those to rotate any further. And let's keep going here. And so that's pretty good. Let's deselect those. And then we just got these last two sets here. Let's deselect those. And I might pull this one up a hair. Now, I do have some weird issues going on with my wireframe. So ideally with your edge looping, you want it to be more organic and smooth in terms of how these edge loops are running. And you notice just because of the way I rotated this down, I've got this weird sharp angle happening right here. Let's just grab that vert by itself and rotate it back up. And actually, let me undo that. I'm going to tap B to turn off soft select. And let's get that to conform a little more nicely there with the rest of our edge flow. It might not make much of a difference here on our smooth preview, but it might do weird things when we start rendering with the light angles. So I just want to make sure, again, we're getting nice, clean geometry. I also want to maybe keep in mind sort of the spacing here. So again, usually with your quads, it is nice if we can maintain sort of an even or a mostly even spacing between all of these. So I'm going to start coming in now, and I'm going to select these here. And let's rotate these down a bit, and let me actually take this one and take it up And let's take this one and pull it down. And then I'm going to start with this next set of vertices, and let's just rotate these down. So I'm just trying to break up the spacing between all of these quads. This one looks a little weird. Let's rotate that back up here. And that should be good for my upper eyelid. We might come back in and tweak it later, but it looks like it is conforming pretty nicely here with my eyeball. You could, if you wanted to, so let's say you've rotated your eyelid down, but your eyeball is poking through. What you could do is start selecting these vertices here. And I'm going to hit X-ray mode just to make sure I didn't accidentally select any of the verts behind or inside the head. And then you could pull these backwards or forwards depending on what you need. So, you know, I could start pulling these things forward, maybe turn on the soft select and pull those forwards or backwards just to get it to conform to the eye a little better. And so, because we're using surface instead of volume, so normally if I had volume, right now with that soft select it would be grabbing that lower eyelid, but because we're using surface, it's not. Now let's start moving the lower eyelid up just a little bit so we get a completely closed eye. So I'm going to turn off soft select. I'm going to grab those same series of vertices here on the opposite side. So I always grab the two here on the ridge. So let's grab those. And we're going to do this all the way up to right before the corner there. And then let's rotate these guys up. Actually, let's I'm going to shift select this one row of verts here underneath the lid. And then let's start rotating these up. I'm going to frame this up a little better here now. And again, always just looking at the corner to see how these sides are lining up. And once we kind of reach that point there, let me actually rotate these up a little further. I'll deselect the corners and then keep rotating up. So again, we'll just keep going here. And again, I'm marquee dragging while holding control to deselect my verts. Now, there's still a little bit of a gap there in the eyelid. So I might come in now and rotate the upper eyelid down a little bit more. And I might have to turn on X-ray mode to see that vert inside. And there we go. So we've got our eye closed. Now there's probably still some fine tuning and tweaking I can do because there's this little bit of a gap here. I just need to figure out what vertices are causing that, and we can move these by hand. Oh. And so my guess is going to be, I know we can definitely take these down a little bit. So I'm going to translate these down instead of rotating them. What else we got in there? So this is where it gets a little confusing. There we go. Let's check the other corner. So the other corner looks pretty good. And those are our eyes. So our eyes are all done and set up. Let's go ahead and hit Control S to save because I don't want to do that again. Let's go back to our BlendShapes. So we'll go to Windows, Animation Editors, and Shape Editor. Oh no. Oh. The edit button wasn't selected, but it still seems to have worked. I'm going to be really sad if it applied that to all of my nodes. Let's turn the other nodes on and see what happens. Oh, thank goodness. Whew. I don't know how that got deselected, but I'm not going to argue with it if it still worked. All right, cool. So at this point, you want to make absolutely sure you are completely done with your eye blink. Because what we're going to do now is we're going to delete the target. So let's go ahead and select it. I know I'm not going to do anything else with this. I'm just going to hit delete. And I'm going to make sure over here we're still good to go. So once you do that, it's permanent. So just make sure that you're completely done with the eye. I mean, if you really want, you could hide it, but you'll eventually need to delete it when you go to clean up and finalize your rig. But so my eye blinks are going. Let's see, my brow raise is going, and then all of these are going. Cool. So the last thing we need to do, we will do the corrective blend shape, but we're going to do that last. What I would like to do now is start setting up attributes to automate the animation for us so that we don't have to animate it here in the shape editor. So I'm going to tap on over here to our main perspective camera, and we're going to start setting these all up one at a time. Let's open up the channel box here. Let's grab our head controller and let's start adding the attributes that we need. So I'm going to come up here and hit Edit, Add Attribute. And I'm going to need a smile, a frown, brow raise, and a eye blink. So let's go ahead and set all those up. They're all going to be floats. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to type in smile. Let's do a float with a minimum of 0, a maximum of 10, and hit Add. I want a frown. Again, minimum of 0, maximum of 10, hit Add. Let's see, the next one's going to be brow raise, minimum of 0, maximum of 10. And then let's do eye blink. Again, minimum of 0, maximum of 10, and hit Add. And so let's close this, and what we're going to do is we're going to add, we're going to use set-driven key to connect all of these things. Now, what I'm going to do here is for my blend nodes, I'm going to make sure they're all set to 1. So those are all set to 1. I want to take the targets, so the smile, frown, brow ridge, brow raise, and eye blink. Let's take them all to 0. So just the targets, all the targets are 0. The blend nodes themselves are set to 1. Let's grab our controller. I'm going to click one of those new attributes that I just created, and let's go up to Edit, and let's do Set Driven Key. Now, the controller, or the attributes on the controller, are the driver. The blend shapes, or the targets rather, are our driven, because we need them to follow whatever the target, or the driver does. So let's load the controller. Let's grab the head controller, and let's load it as the driver. And if we scroll down here on the right-hand column, you'll notice we have all of those attributes that we just added. So smile, frown, brow raise, and eye blink. I'm going to start here at the top, and we'll just work our way down one expression at a time, just so it's less confusing. So let's come in here, and we want to check the head controller as well. We want to make sure all of the expressions, so the smile, the frown, the brow raise, and the eye blink are all set to 0, and then the targets are set to 0. So that means they're all in a off or a default state. And then let's go ahead and let's start with the smile. So in the top of our driver, I'm going to select the head controller and highlight the smile attribute. And then in our driven, we need to load our face blend node. So to do that, we have to select the blend node, not the target. We can't select just the targets. So I'm going to select that kid face blend node. I'm going to right click. And so when you click on it, you're not actually selecting it. You have to right click on it and go down to Select Blend Shape Node. And now it's in your selection, and in the set driven key, we're going to hit load driven. And so here in the left-hand column, it's going to have your blend shape node listed, so that kid face blend node. With this selected, to the right, we should have now the targets. So we have the smile, frown, and brow ridge. And so we're only working on smile for now. So I'm going to click smile. And right now, the controller smile and the target smile are both set to 0. Let's just go ahead and hit key. Once we've keyed that, we can now update their attributes, or their values. So let's grab the head. Let's take the smile to 10. Let's take the smile target to 1. And then we'll hit set key again, with these things still selected. So we'll hit key. And then if we were to play around with our smile attribute here in the channel box, if I go to 0, it'll get rid of the smile. If I bring it to 10, we're full smile. Cool. So that's working. Let's keep going now. So let's move down to the next attribute. So in set driven key, I'm going to select the frown. Over here in the shape editor, I'm going to leave the frown at 0. And then I also want to make sure the frown on the controller is also 0. And then in the driven, for the kid face blend node, let's click frown. And so both of these are currently at 0. Let's go ahead and key those together. And then, again, let's just set these values. So for frown, let's set that to 10 in the attribute over here in the channel box. And then let's take the target for frown and take it up to 1. And then we'll hit key again. And then I should be able to, with this attribute in the channel box, go from 0 to back to default pose, and then 10 to our full frown. Cool. So that's working. Let's go ahead and zero that out. And let's move to our brow raise. Now this one's a little more complicated just because I have to do this to 2 different blend nodes. We'll just take it one step at a time. So in the driven, let's click the brow raise. In the channel box over here, let's make sure the brow raise is set to default, which is 0. And then let's come over here to the brow ridge, and it's still 0, so that's fine. Let's go ahead now, and in the driven, for the blend node, select the brow ridge. And with everything set to default, let's go ahead and hit key. And then let's flip it. So over here in the channel box, let's take that to 10. Over here in the shape editor, let's take the brow ridge to 1. And then, again, with everything still selected here in set driven key, so the head controller with brow raise and the driven, which is the kid face blend node with brow ridge, let's go ahead and hit key. Now, if I were to go over there in the channel box and adjust this, the face will move along with it, but the eyebrows will not because we haven't done those yet. So I should get that. So that's working. Cool. Let's go ahead now, and for the brow raise, let's set it back down to default. So we'll key that to 0. In the driver, we're going to leave the brow raise still selected, so it's going to default and stay at 0. And then let's come over here into the shape editor, and now we need to load a new driver, or driven rather. And so we need to drive the eyebrow geometry. So this kid brows blend node, let's right click and select its blend node now. So select blend node shape. Over here in the set driven key, I'm going to load driven. And now we have that brow raise target. Let's go ahead and select that. And then with everything set to default, so at 0, let's go ahead and hit key. And then we just need to flip those values. So I'm going to go back to the controller. Let's set the brow raise to 10. Let's go here to the shape editor, and for the brow raise, for the eyebrow geometry, let's set that to 1. And then back here in the set driven key, again with all of the same attributes still selected, let's go ahead and hit key. And now that one attribute should drive the animation or the movement of both geometries. So let's test that out. Let's grab that brow raise. Cool. So now I can control that brow raise with 2 separate geometries and 1 attribute. All right, so that's working. The last one we need to do is our eye blink. So let's go ahead and let's grab our head controller and make sure the eye blink is set to 0, and it is. Here in the driven, I'm going to click that head controller and select the eye blink attribute. And then for driven, we need to load our blink blend node. So over here, let's grab that kid eye blink node. Let's right click and select the blend shape node. Let's load it as driven. And now in the bottom right column, we should have that eye blink target. And so everything's at default, which is 0. Let's go ahead and key that. And then again, we just flip these values. So I'm going to grab the head controller up here. I'm going to take the eye blink attribute up to 10. And then over here in my shape editor, I'm going to take that eye blink target, and let's take its value all the way up to 1. And then let's hit key. Again, just make sure that those same attributes are all still highlighted there. And then let's test that out. So let's grab the head controller, and let's play with the eye blink here. Cool. So now I have attributes that will control my eyelids, my smile, my frown, and my brow raise. And then do keep in mind, you can run multiple of these at the same time. So if you try to use your frown and your smile, it's good. They're going to negate one another, or they're going to make weird geometry together. But you can do all of these at the same time. So let's key those in. All right, so that's most of our blend shapes. There's really just one left to go, and that's a corrective blend shape. But again, I just want to save real quick because I really would hate to do this again if something crashes. So that turned out pretty well. Let's go ahead and close our set driven key for now. We'll come back to that here once we're done. So I'm going to do a corrective blend shape on our pant leg. Now, you would use this for anything that would necessitate a corrective blend shape. So it really depends on how your character is, what kind of things it has on the model in terms of like clothing and stuff like that. But if you do notice there's certain areas where, let's say, this geometry rotates to a certain angle and things are penetrating, what we can do is use a corrective blend shape to automate or control movement so that we avoid that intersecting geometry. So in this case, if I were to grab my foot, for example, and rotate it up, it will get to a point where the foot itself intersects the or overlaps the cuff of my pant leg, and I would like to avoid that. And so we're going to use a blend shape, and what we're going to do is set that up using set driven key. And essentially what it'll do is it'll say, hey, when this ankle joint is at this degree of rotation, we're going to automate to this blend shape where the pant leg is pulled up. And then when the ankle rotation is at 0, it'll be in its default state. So what we're going to need to do is we need to rotate the foot first into the position where we would actually have that overlap or intersecting geometry. So let's go ahead and rotate this foot up like so. And there we get a little bit of intersection. And again, I would like to avoid that if possible. So let's grab our body here and let's create a new blend shape with this selected. So I'm going to grab this and let's hit create blend shape. I'm going to name this node real quick. So this is going to be kid underscore pant underscore blend node. And then we need to make a target. So I want to make sure that the pants are still selected, or your entire body if your character is like mine and it's all one piece. That's still fine. Let's come in here and let's add a new target with this blend node still selected. And then let's name this. So let's call this pant cuff. For that target, let's make sure it's under edit mode here. So it is. And then again, we did that delta mush. I just want to make sure that that delta mush isn't getting precedence over our blend shape. So let's just make sure real quick. I'm going to right click on our geometry. Let's go down to inputs. Let's go down to all inputs. And yeah, so that delta mush is all the way at the top. Let's go ahead and take our blend shape and drag it, or middle mouse click and drag it to the top. Now I notice it really won't let you drag it above, so I'm going to put it underneath the delta mush and let go. And then I'll take the delta mush, middle mouse click and drag it right underneath the blend shape, and that should work. As long as it's on top, that's all that matters. So we'll go ahead and hit close. Let's grab our pant leg. I'm going to right click and go to vertex, and let's go into x-ray mode. And I'm going to start selecting these verts here right around that pant cuff. I'm going to turn on soft select. So I just tap B and we'll increase the size of my brush. I'm going to hit 3 to go into smooth preview and turn off x-ray mode, and we're going to pull this up. Oh, so I forgot to fix this earlier. So before, when we were doing the eyes, I left the maintain component position turned on. So let's go into our tool real quick. So I'm going to double click on my translation tool and that pen component pivot. Let's turn that off. There we go. I also don't want x-ray mode on, or not x-ray, symmetry turned on, so let's go turn that off. And it looks like I'll have to make the selection again so that it's not selecting the other side. And then let's turn the x-ray mode off and pull this up, like so. And that looks all right. Might fine tune or tweak this a little bit. And that's really all I need to do for that. So that blend shape's pretty simple. We just need to move the pant leg away from the foot. For our right click and go back to object mode now. And take a look. I should be able to slide through that pant cuff like so. So that looks pretty good. Let's go back to a value of 1 there. Let's turn off edit because I no longer want to edit this. And now we're going to use set driven key to automate this blend for us so that we don't have to do it by hand. It'll just automate when this gets to this certain rotation. Now, you would be tempted probably to set this up with the controller. We don't want to do it to the controller. We want to do it to the ankle joint itself. So you'll notice, when we rotate this controller, we actually have to rotate the controller. It looks like an X to get it up on the back of the heel like this. But if we were to look at the joint itself, it's going to be the same amount, but in a different axis. So it's actually happening in the rotate Z of the joint. And so we do want to make sure it's on the joint and not the controller, because the joint is the only thing that is getting deformation, or at least in this case, attributes in rotate Z. This rotation's happening. This would happen if we use the reverse foot setup. This joint would get rotation, and when we use this controller. Now, if we use just the controller, this would only ever happen if we use the controller itself. So we just want to make absolutely sure that when we do set-driven key on this, that we're doing it to the ankle joint, not the controller. So let's go ahead and let's see what needs to be the driver. So the driver is the joint. So let's select the ankle joint. Let's go here and click on that axis that's getting rotation. So in this case, it's rotate Z. And let's go up here to edit. Let's go down to set driven key, and now let's load this ankle joint as the driver. So here it says load driver. Let's go ahead and tap that. And now what we need to do is start connecting these things. So we're going to need to select the pant node here. So I'm going to right click on that node and go to select blend shape node. Let's load it as the driven. And then what we need to do is connect the ankles rotate Z. So again, it's the attribute that has rotation on it. Rotate Z to the kid pant blend node pant cuff target. And so we want to make sure that pant cuff target is set to 1, and we'll hit key. And now at this point, we just put everything back to default. So let's grab our controller, put it at 0. Let's take our blend node or our target for pant cuff and put it to 0. And then we'll hit key again with all those same things still selected in our set driven key dialog box. So I'll go ahead and hit key. We're done with this, so let me go ahead and close set driven key, and let's rotate our controller. And so when I rotate my controller, it should automate the animation or movement of that blend shape node. Now, one other thing to keep in mind, and if you need to go ahead and go, but because that's class, but you can actually adjust the curves for this so that the pant leg doesn't start lifting up until later. And so what we could do is select the blend node. So if I come over here and right click on that blend node for the pant and hit select blend shape node, and then go up to Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, you can actually see the tangent or the curve for this node. And so what we could do is take the handle here and add more hold, or reduce the amount of hold depending on what we need. And so to see this, we might actually add animation on the controller. So let's set this at 0 and key select the controller there, and then maybe 30 frames later, rotate it up and key select that, just so we can scrub through this. And let's go back and grab that node here. Nope, that's not what I wanted. Right click, select blend shape node, and then in the graph editor, again, we can adjust the curve. To change the timing at which this pant cuff raises. And then if we were to scrub through this animation, it's going to take a little longer before it gets up there. So again, you can adjust when this happens through that rotation just by adjusting the timing of your curve. So let me go ahead and stop there. That's really it for our rig, at least in terms of skinning, rigging, blend shapes, and all that. The last thing we're going to have to do is we are going to do general cleanup. And so what that means is we need to find any of the rigid geometries that need to just follow, so the hair and things like that. We need to parent those to the respective joints they need to go to. We'll also, as a rigger, your job is to make sure your animators can't break your rig. So we're going to assess all of our controllers and figure out which ones do and do not need certain attributes, and lock and hide the ones that should not receive animation. And we will also create a world con, which should ideally control the position and scale of our entire rig. And we'll also house a high-res, low-res switch so we can go between low-res geometry and our smooth geometry. So I'll stop here. On Monday, again, we'll pick back up. It'll be really quick for cleanup, and then all week next week will be work week. And these are due a week from Monday. So you have all week to finish these. Oh, if you have any questions